Arja, Draugi. It is a pleasure and an honour to welcome you here today virtually to the National Library of Latvia. My name is Emer Friel and I am the Ambassador of Ireland to Latvia. This event is a partnership between the Embassy of Ireland, the National Library of Latvia, Literature Ireland and Roberts Books. Our event today is a double celebration. We are celebrating the Irish Festival of St. Bridget's Day, also known as Imbolc. We are also celebrating the centenary of the publication of Ulysses by James Joyce. Those two might seem like very different occasions, but they have a strong common feature: talented, brave women. St. Bridget's Day is celebrated in Ireland on the 1st of February. Bridget was a 5th century saint, named for the pagan goddess of fire. She has many stories associated with her, but throughout we see her as a strong woman who follows her own path in life. For the past number of years, the Irish embassies around the world have been holding events for St. Bridget's Day to celebrate the creativity of women. This celebration comes in many forms, and it gives us an opportunity to reflect on and consider the role of women in our modern world. It also gives us an opportunity to bring visibility to women who might not normally be in the spotlight, but who are, in their own ways, inspirational in what they do. Our second reason is to celebrate the creativity of literature as we mark 100 years since the publication of Ulysses. Ulysses came into print on the 2nd of February 1922, James Joyce's 40th birthday. We celebrate the man and the book, but we also celebrate all the women without whom that book may never have come into being. The book was first published by a woman, one who was willing to do what others were not. James Joyce was financially supported by a woman. And it was his Nora Barnacle, the lifelong love, whose strength and passion makes her perhaps Ireland's greatest muse. A lot has changed in the century since Ulysses was published, but a lot still rings true. The courage needed to take a risk, the challenge of giving voice and conveying story, the pull between commercial demands and the art of writing, and the balancing act of survival as a writer. Which is why I'm delighted that we are able to bring this discussion to you today here from the library in Latvia. Our wonderful panel of publishers from Ireland and from Latvia are going to explore all of this as they share experiences as women in publishing and ask, does it really matter? They are Marielle Deegan, General Manager at New Island Books, Una Orinska, Project Manager for the Zweigne ABC, Joanna Smith, Publishing Operations and Marketing Director at Hachette Ireland, Inga Abelita, Managing Director at Latvijas Medi, Lisa Cohen, Co-founding Publisher at Tram Press, and Renāte Punka, our moderator for today, who wears many hats, including President of the Latvian Publishers Association, the Latvian representative with the Federation of European Publishers, and Managing Director of Jāņa Rozes Publishers. I think we're going to be in for a very interesting discussion. Some small points of housekeeping before we get into the conversation. The discussion will be in English, but if you wish to listen in Latvian, there is that option on screen. And if you wish to ask a question to the panel, please go to Slido, that's sli.do, and enter the code Bridget, that's BRIGID. Or you can use the Slido app with the same code. You can ask your question in English or in Latvian, because Renāte is multi-talented. But before we get into our conversation, it gives me an absolute pleasure and delight to hand you to Mr. Andris Vilks, the director of the library here in Riga, to say a few warm words of welcome.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Ms. Friel, dear discussion participants and virtual audience. I am glad that Latvian and Irish professionals connected for the online experience sharing. St. Bridget's Day is associated with beginning of spring and also poetry and learning. For me personally, Bridget's Day or Brigitas Diena is name of my mother. We always celebrated her name days on the 1st of February. And name day in Latvia is as important as a person's birthday. The National Library of Latvia created database of Latvian book publishers from the beginnings to 1918 database Latviešu grāmatniecības darbinieki līdz 1918. gadam. It contains biographies of persons involved in book production and dissemination of in the territory of modern-day Latvia. You won't find many names of women publishers there, but I'm glad that the situation changed in the turn of the century, and now the major Latvian publishing houses are led by women. For libraries, gender does not really matter, as we create true and complete bibliographic records and provide access to collections without any censorship restrictions. I wish to thank the Embassy of Ireland in Latvia for choosing the National Library as a platform for today's event and wishing you all productive discussions. Thank you very much.
Mr. Vilks, paldies, thank you so much for those nice words, and happy belated Names Day to your mother. Renate, let me hand the microphone to you to lead us through our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Ambassador. Thank you, dear Director, for joining us. I know that you are busy, as men are, but and I'm really glad to welcome a brilliant company to this virtual stage of Latvia National Library, and I am pleased to mention that the Latvia National Library not only keeps the books published by men and women and written by men and women in Latvian and other languages, but before COVID crisis started, it also started to host our Riga Book Festival in October, and I really do hope that we will return this year again to these premises and to celebrate books in as many ways as we can. But today's topic, I think it's really interesting, it's important, and I am really glad that 5 professionals from the book industry have agreed to be this afternoon with us and to discuss it. And with selection of these 5 ladies, we asked to participate those who really are hands-on professionals dealing both with the book selection process, with the contacts with authors and translators, who visits the book fairs, who meets also international publishing community. So they really see on a day-to-day basis what the industry looks like. I already had some conversation on Monday preparing for the event, and I'm really sure that they have much more to tell you that the time limited today allows. So me myself also, as you heard, I am President of Latvian Publishers Association for already the 3rd term. So I can assure you that the industry in Latvia is very competitive, but in a good way, actually. And I think in some ways it is really persistence of women that allows to achieve us some things, like we managed to lower VAT from 12% to 5% since this January, and it was a huge effort, believe me. Let's start to share the ideas, and we decided, as you already noticed in speech of Ambassador, that it will be these introductory phrases, which I really kindly ask each of the speakers to tell a little bit about their experiences, about their current role in publishing business, and also how they see their task and aim as a publisher in this situation. And let's start with Marielle Deegan, who is representing New Ireland, and she works in various roles here and had built a successful career in this publishing house. So Marielle, the floor is yours, and please let's talk about what you are doing now.
Thank you very much, Renata. So I work for New Island Books. We're, I suppose, by Irish standards, a kind of a medium-sized independent publisher. We publish roughly 20 or 25 books a year. About half of those are literary fiction, and the other half would be Irish interest non-fiction. So I've been working in publishing for about 15 years. I started in a marketing role, and now I work in general management. So my role has kind of expanded more to business management, production, and rights.
Okay, thank you. Now let's go to Una, our Latvian speaker. She represents Zvaigznes, one of the biggest publishing house. And now it's turn is yours.
So, my name is Una Rinska. I'm working for publishing house Zvaigznes, and I started working for the publishing house in 2008 as a proofreader. So now I'm a project manager dealing with translated fiction titles and working with foreign agents, authors, translators, editors, and doing everything what's included in this. So, yeah. Thank you.
And you are the publisher of Sally Rooney for the Irish listeners.
Yeah, we have published up to now only one book by her, but we hope that we will go on. Yeah, so.
Okay, next is Joanna in my list, and she is Publishing Operations and Marketing Director in Hachette Ireland. And Hachette is one of the biggest companies in the world, but Hachette Ireland, what is different from Hachette in total, and what is your role and expectations here?
Hachette is indeed a big international company. We ourselves, the Irish team, are actually quite small. There's only 8 of us. I started with Hachette Ireland in 2010 as an editorial assistant, and I'm currently publishing operations and marketing director, as you mentioned. I work across a wide range of areas, which I think anyone who works in a small team does. So my role includes editorial, marketing, digital publishing, so our audio list and our ebook list. Hachette Ireland publishes trade fiction and non-fictions. So we'd be more sort of on the commercial side. We have a lot of female authors on our fiction list, and they write across a wide range of genres, from historical to crime and so-called women's fiction, which might be an interesting topic to explore today. And we're proud to have published a lot of nonfiction by women also, a lot of which focuses on sort of important moments in Ireland's social history. An example would be Belonging by Catherine Corliss, which we published last September. Catherine's research into her hometown's local history led to a government investigation into Irish mother and baby homes. And Overcoming by Vicky Phelan, who unearthed the Irish cervical check scandal. I suppose in terms of our work, or the focus of our work, as I mentioned, we do publish a lot of female voices on our list, and there are a lot of female voices in our company as well, which I'm happy to say. So I think for us, our focus is going to be on inclusivity and making sure that the widest range of voices are heard in that group, and just making sure that, we're giving readers stories that they see themselves in, and also stories that entertain people, which is, I suppose, one of our primary aims as well.
Thanks. Inga, you are the next, and you are also represent one of a bit similar publishing houses in Latvia who works with a lot of women authors. Please tell us a bit about more.
Hello, thank you, Renāte. As Renāte mentioned, my name is Inga Abelīte. I'm managing editor in Latvian publishing house Latvijas Nacionālā. As a publishing house, we do a wide variety of book genres, both fiction and non-fiction, original literature and translated literature. And when I started 6 years ago to work in publishing house, I started as a project manager. And as John previously mentioned, when you start in a small team, you do quite a wide range of jobs until you arrive to your specific point. And at the moment, I'm working as a managing editor, and in addition to my job tasks, I also oversee printed calendar production, but it's a different story. And for me, publishing and our publishing house is about conveying good story from a writer to reader. And we are very proud to work with many Latvian authors, both women and men.
Okay, and then last but not least, I would like to hear something from co-founding publisher at Tramp Press, and she's one of the challenging publishers, as we will hear, and her name is Lisa Cohen.
Thank you, Renate. I really appreciate being introduced as challenging. It was very appropriate. Thank you. So Tramp Press was set up just before 2014. We officially launched in 2014. It is myself and my colleague, Sarah Davis-Goff. My background was in I have a PhD in Irish theatre studies. I'm very interested in 20th century Irish literature. So I took that idealism with me, but I've been in publishing in and out for about 20 years. So Sarah and I met at a time when it was very difficult to find work in publishing, and we talked about setting up on our own. And something that came up a lot for us when we talked about what a good publishing house would look like was that a publishing house should publish very few books, but publish them well, for instance, if we were doing it our way. And so we only published 3 or 4 titles a year. And the idea is that we work extremely hard on those titles. We mark them very, very hard. We just make those the showcase titles. We have a very high standard for what we will publish. So we don't often see more than 3 or 4 titles a year that we think would fit what we're looking for. We have an open submission policy, which means anyone can send us their manuscript, which is unusual. Not everybody does that. And we personally experienced quite a lot of sexism in the industry. And we also saw editorial decisions in the industry at the time that we thought was driven by legacy behavior, I suppose, and sexism. And a big knock-on effect for that was very good work by women not being picked up. And we found when we published certain titles, we would just find a little bit of resistance in the trade, for instance, where someone might say, this is a very good book, but it's written by a woman, or the main character is a woman. So, you might find it's a bit difficult to sell and so on. So we have had tremendous success with publishing literary fiction. In 2018, we expanded to nonfiction, and we really look for exceptional writing and particularly stories that we're not seeing being told enough. And something that we do alongside that, we try to be accessible, we try to be reachable. We also offer sort of one-to-one sessions with people who are interested in publishing so that we can kind of keep an ear to the ground. And we're trying to expand our remit all the time. As the other publishers here have said, everybody's trying to bring stories that deserve to be told. We want our list to look more like the readers and not like an idea that publishers have, because there has been terrible sort of conservatism in that in the past. So those are the kinds of things we're aiming to do. Books of ours that people may have heard of include Solar Bones by Mike McCormack, A Ghost in the Throat by Doireann Ní Ghríofa, Notes to Self by Emily Pine. So those are just a few of them. So we publish very few, but very well, I think.
A lot. So these are people we want to listen today, and now to the core of the topic. And I think one of the things that had been asked or discussed during recent years quite often is that there are a lot of women in publishing, in some countries it's up to 80%. It's I think also Ireland and Latvia is within that range. On the other hand, of course, in many countries, still decision makers or these policy makers in the industry are still gentlemen. It's not so in Latvia, as already Andris Vilks mentioned, and we are proof to that really a lot of publishing houses are owned or managed by women. But maybe tell a little bit more about the situation in Ireland, and do you feel it's changing, or is it really a very hot topic still? Please, maybe Joanna can tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in my experience, I think it's exactly what you said. There are a lot of women in the industry. I think something that I did notice when I started in publishing was that a lot of companies, maybe, both in the UK, as I work a bit with UK and Ireland, would there be a lot of women in the company, but maybe the head of the company was a man. But actually, I've noticed that's been changing as well. Or, for example, my own company, there are 2 managing directors, 1 man and 1 woman. So I think that from my point of view, I don't know that I haven't been a part of many conversations about where people felt, oh, we need more women in the industry. I think it was that kind of focus on, women in decision-making roles, but also then how, as going back to a point Lisa made, which is about how who's in the decision-making roles filters down as well to A, the experience of being a woman, maybe in a junior role in a publishing house, and B, what your list looks like. And I think that, our lists all feature a lot of female authors. So I don't necessarily think that there's a problem there either, but I do think that inclusivity, as I mentioned, is something that I think everyone will be looking at very soon. And I also do think there is a bit of an issue in the kind of literary landscape around respect for female authors in a way that's equal to male authors. Where we've been talking about Joyce and Ulysses a lot, and that's really important. And, it's a work that we treasure on a national level, an author who we're very proud of. But I would love to see female authors mentioned in those kind of conversations more. And my hope is that, we're all very busy publishing female authors, that, those voices will be amplified. And the next time you see, a poster which features the 6 best Irish authors, that there'll be a woman's face there, as often there isn't. So I suppose it's all about what a publisher looks like can influence, how the kind of voices readers read, the kind of voices they hear.
Yeah, it was quite interesting for me I was not realizing this problem until I was speaking in a panel on women in literature with the German presidency, and then the president of European Writers' Council mentioned that they had investigated the winners, the list of winners of some very prestigious literary prizes, and there is a very, very strong majority of male winners. And then I looked up our situation, and I'm proud to say that in our country this is not so. And we had discussed it with you a bit earlier, that in UK and in English language prizes the situation improves, but still, yeah, indeed, in Goncourt Prize or in Strega in Italy, there is really a very, very big majority of gentlemen. And this is a huge discussion, of course, because why this is so, and this is really also the jury who picks or promotion and marketing is given more to male, but But I think there is a very good solution to this, especially to making a list neutral. And I want Inga to tell a little story about how her publishing house is picking the authors for their annual series. Can you tell us?
Yes, of course. We do have a series which can be subscribed for original works in Latvian, and we make like contest every year, and it's anonymous. So when you send in your work, we don't know who you are. You must give your contacts in additional letter, which is enclosed and only known for one project manager. So it's always interesting to see those works and see how jury is trying to guess who is a personality who wrote the story. Is it a man or women? And I'm happy to say that last year it was about 70% women and 30% men. And there were cases when jury thought it was different person who wrote them. Yeah, so. It's kind of it makes it gender neutral. It makes it available for everybody. So it's always interesting also to see after if men or women wrote in another gender from another gender perspective, and why they did so. It's a question of will it be read by more people if I write from women perspective or from men perspective? Am I writing to female readers or men readers?
How do you think, dear ladies, and I would like to hear short answers from each of you. This is really... Does the work really shows that there is one particular audience, and when you read the book you choose for publishing, does it really matters to you is the main character is man or women, and from which perspective it's taken? Let's start with Marielle. Just
It's a difficult question because it can really depend on the work. I find that personally, I am probably more drawn to books with a female protagonist. It doesn't really matter whether that's being written by a man or a woman, because I think the work of a writer is to use their imagination, and you can rarely have a book that has just one gender perspective. As long as it kind of reads true. And I suppose maybe the topics that are being covered by a male writer might, they're probably not going to be able to talk authentically about childbirth, for example, or violence against women, maybe that kind of thing. But generally, I'm not sure it matters to me that much. Like I would commission a book based on its literary merit, whether, I felt that I was the reader for it or not. As long as I feel that there are readers out there who are going to appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Sanuna?
I don't think that it matters much for me who has written a book, because I think, as the previous speaker already mentioned, that usually each book there has both female and male characters. And either it's written by a female person or a male person, it's still you need to know how to depict the character of other gender. It's one thing. And then what I have noticed is that sometimes there are couples writing together one book. Sometimes they reveal that they are a man and a wife. Sometimes they have chosen a pen name which covers or disguises to a female and a male person. And sometimes it seems to me when reading that I think that this part is written by a woman, but this one is by the male author. But maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? It's only my impression. But it's very interesting. Yeah. So.
How about Joanna?
Yeah, I think it's all about authenticity, isn't it? It's kind of about whether or not the male author is writing his female characters well, and vice versa. I think that's the first thing you're looking for as a reader, whether you're a reader looking to publish something or a reader who's bought a book in a bookshop or on their iPad or whatever. You're looking, for an authentic character, a character who feels real. And there are male authors who write women very well, and vice versa. I think, off topic slightly, but I think kind of where it becomes more complex is, I think, when you're looking at, say, maybe white people writing stories from the perspective of people of color. And I think part of the reason why that's such an issue is people of color aren't being given the same opportunities to have their voices heard. And I think now that we're in quite a healthy place with, female authors being published, it's maybe become less of an issue, whereas maybe 30, 40 years ago, if the market was full of books by men and about women, and not so many books by women at all, that would have felt like more of a problem to me, but now it doesn't bother me.
Inga?
For me, it doesn't matter who is a writer, men or women, and also I have noticed that I don't take really in account is it a female or a male character. It's as the previous speakers told, it's more about authenticity of character. So I tend to ask myself sometimes or to question some particular aspects of the story if I know that the writer is from another gender. Then, for example, like mentioned childbirth or some other specific topics, I ask myself, does he or she really knows, and how he knows? But yeah, maybe it's not in total. It's not the main thing for me, the gender.
Thank you. And Lisa, how about you?
Yes, I think I have pretty much the same opinion. I think by all means, authors should venture outside of their own experience, but where it falls down is where you can tell that there was no I suppose a good example I always like to think of is there's an episode of The West Wing where a character who is pregnant with twins experiences a contraction. She's brought straight to hospital and asks what's going on. And the doctor said, you're going to meet your babies in about 15 minutes. And I thought, well, there was clearly no woman in that writing room there. This is what happens, I think. There's a diversity benefit in decision-making when you speak to and have experience of somebody who doesn't look like you for whatever reason. And I think that you get to write about childbirth as a man as long as you do your research. And I do think we just come from a big tradition of people being quite careless about that. And I think that we've seen a lot on Twitter in particular. There was a very funny thread, maybe a year ago now, where people were talking about how men can tend to write women. And they often have these cliches about women regarding themselves in the mirror and so on. And so many people were able to pile on with lots and lots of jokes and to build on the memes so easily. It really speaks to, assumptions people have about lazy authors. And lazy authors can be checked by diligent editors who can also, speak to colleagues. So there is a whole ecosystem here. I think also that Joanna touched on something really important there, that oppressions are interconnected. Not having enough women in publishing can mean not having a perspective where someone says, look, things have improved for us, but now we need to ask, why are we not seeing more trans writers being published? There are many, many writers who don't look like John Updike, who are at the height of their talent, and we need to see more of them. But I'm sorry, I guess that's a bit off topic to say, but we have a rule, I suppose, when it comes to writing a character that the author isn't, we would say if you were to swap the genders of these characters, what's materially different? And that can be just a really easy exercise if everybody just changes their names. And something I was telling everyone the other day, we say to male authors, if they write a woman, if she could be replaced by a sexy lamp, and nothing would materially change in the text, then you have a problem with the text. So that's just a good sort of a rule of thumb. I certainly have experience myself of being in other publishing companies when I was junior, that if I called out something in a manuscript that I said, this is not plausible, this is not, periods don't work like this, or whatever, I would find resistance to that kind of feedback. I have experience of authors being more likely to take criticism when they think the editor is male. And that's an experience. And something that we continue to experience in Tramp Press is if an author sends a manuscript and we decline it, people can be very gracious about that. They can be very understanding. Sometimes people take it badly. And a very common reaction from male authors is to ask to speak to our bosses and to assume that we work for men. So this is something that happens all the time. I spoke to my colleague Sarah about it during the week, and she said, yeah, I just got one the other day. She started forwarding me these emails. I couldn't even open them, but there is sort of an assumption in Ireland, in the Dublin industry anyway, in my experience, where it is never taken for granted that women are in a senior position. And also, you can be the most senior member of your company, but there are men who are still wielding power, such as a buyer for a very large bookshop, for instance, who might say, we don't want your books. So it's still very tricky to untangle all of that, and it's an ongoing process.
Can I just add, sorry, to that point as well, that if you have a small team, like our editorial team, for example, is all women, but there's only 3 of us, but we can't represent all women, so we might think something sounds authentic and someone else might read it and go, it doesn't really work for me. So I think that's also something that, I definitely need to keep in mind more, just because I think this sounds authentic and genuine. I don't speak for all women. I don't represent all women. So there will always be a gap there. But the more inclusive companies are, the more diligent authors are about doing their research and speaking to people about their own experiences, hopefully that will become less and less of a problem.
Can I ask the panel, are you working more with sensitivity readers recently, and what your experience has been? Because that's something that we've been doing a lot of. If there's something we see in a manuscript that we feel, we need somebody else's perspective on, we'll seek out a reader to help us out and let us know that we're not, taking a big awkward misstep. It's mortifying in some ways. It's really important that it be embarrassing to us, and not to the person that we're representing. But I'd love to hear from other people on that.
We do use sensitivity readers on our reader panels. I haven't really been involved in it much, because it would usually be Aoife who'd be managing that, but I know that she definitely does. But also, like, in our, I suppose we are trying to be more sensitive to the diversity of Irish society in our commissioning, and not just represent what our experiences are, to realize that there are other experiences, and that kind of extends to who's working in the company. So we may be kind of unusual in Irish publishing, but we have an equal gender balance in our staff. We've just hired a new person who is a man, yay. But yeah, that kind of makes us quite even, and all voices are welcomed, in commissioning decisions. So, everyone is encouraged to read manuscripts and to bring forward their opinion, and we really kind of welcome the fact that we have people from different backgrounds who maybe just have a different take on things. And, obviously some of us are, nobody in the organization comes from the exact same background. Some are from town, some are from rural backgrounds. Some would have had more privileged backgrounds than others, but we're always trying to expand that diversity.
Ladies from Latvia, your comments?
Maybe. if I may add, we also work with those groups of readers. Sometimes when we get manuscript, we read first ourselves, and then we decide if it should be read by somebody else or there's a specific topic, and we find a specialist, even if it's like the fiction book. And we suggest our authors who is working with us with more than one book, who is staying with us, that they use this, we call it focus groups, where it's both men and women. The raw manuscript is given to them, and so they comments come in, and author work and adjust if there is something where there can be polished. Yes, so it's for fiction work. So it works well. It's actually quite interesting. Of course, readers are not making new story, but they are helping. So the story becomes without flaws.
Wow, that's very empowering for readers.
Yes, they are even sometimes there's cases where they are even like making contests who will be able to read this manuscript before it gets to printing, and so they have home tasks, and it's kind of a community thing.
How very interesting. Do the authors like that? I could imagine.
Yes. Of course, the author keeps the last voice. It's author's work. If the author doesn't agree, so he or she can leave where it is. But they actually say it enriching.
Wonderful. We encourage authors to get feedback from readers, and we do tell them rejecting that feedback is a very valid form of hearing feedback, and the publisher should not be the first person to read your work, in fact. So I love the idea of a focus group and the organization of that. That's a pretty wonderful thing to provide.
Well, before we, I want to keep a little bit this topic further, but before we do that, I would like to remind our listeners that you are also entitled to put the questions on Slido. So if anybody wants to know something I didn't ask and we didn't discuss, please feel free to send us your questions. But back to the conversation. My next logical question is, do you think there is difference between authors, male authors and women authors, just on this point of criticism and how they, who of them, is there a difference of perceiving a criticism and answering to that, how your experience shows? Mariel?
So I don't work in editorial myself, so I haven't had much experience of dealing with editing authors. I do find that, like, when authors are maybe submitting manuscripts, if you reject a female author's manuscript, they're more likely to be a bit kind of apologetic, and they're more self-effacing, whereas male writers tend to be a little bit more confident in their work from the start, from the get-go. They're convinced that what they're submitting is going to be an ideal fit for us, but that is a bit of a generalization.
Inga, your experience?
I also feel it depends more on a character, but it's more like my feelings, just personal, that male authors tends to be more confidential about their work, or more easygoing, and like taking more lightly taking critics, like talk, I'm listening. But female are more like, you need to explain more and be careful not to hurt feelings sometimes. But it's just a personal feeling, maybe also like not really generally speaking.
Una, do you have any ideas about your company?
I don't think that this is gender-related question. I think it's more from the personality, how professional and confident you feel yourself. And if we speak about the authors, like the translators, they are also authors and editors in a way. So I think it depends on a particular person, not the gender.
And Lisa, how is your experience?
Well, I have some numbers. So of the last 5,791 manuscripts that have been sent to Tramp Press, 2,327 were from women. Now, so fewer women are sending us manuscripts. We are very demonstrably a feminist company. We publish a lot of women. We publish men too, but people will often say to us, do you ever think you'd start publishing men? Because when it's not 50% or higher, people assume it's zero, do you know? So our experience has been we get more submissions from men than women. And the reasoning behind that, and you can keep tracing that back, it's very, very difficult just to get to the starting point. For women to see their work on the shelves or to see the kind of work they'd like to write is a whole challenge. For women to feel like they are supported and encouraged to write, for them to be able to submit. Joanna made this very good point the other day that childcare often falls to women. And when you're struggling to find that time to write, you can feel like you really need to justify it being worthwhile. And publishing or being a published writer is desperately unfair. You have to write a whole book before you can sell it in most cases, particularly for fiction anyway, in our experience. So there's a huge risk there that the time won't pay off. And as we know, there's not great money in publishing. So there's a lot of obstacles for women to even get to the starting point. And this is before we say anything about what it is to be a trans writer or a writer of color when you just are not seeing yourself represented. Similarly, if we turn down a manuscript by a woman, she will be apologetic and go away, just broadly speaking, and men are more likely to persist and say, well, if I change it, if I resend it, if I send something else. So there is just culturally, we're sitting at this awkward cultural nexus of, I think it's not enough to say we will publish works by people who are underrepresented, but we sort of have to lean into that. So it's nice, I think, and I think it's very admirable to blind read manuscripts, but I would even go further as to say we need to reach out for authors who haven't been represented and just encourage them that bit more and say, listen, the manuscript isn't right for us, but it's almost there, and here's some advice and some support, and we do that. I think we need to sort of lean in more. If we're really talking about equity, we have to allow for the history of publishing, and we have to try and, mend the balance a bit more. And a sort of counterintuitive point I always make is until we see a lot of mediocre books by women, we're not really seeing true equality, because we all know there's a lot of mediocre books by men out there. So, and then just to your point on criticism, when you criticize work by an author, in our experience, the good authors always want feedback, and that transcends all genders and genres.
Good. Now I liked when Ambassador introducing us said that women should be brave and innovative. And actually, the other day discussing for the conversation, you mentioned that one of the tasks of women and one of the roles of the women is this catering for the fresh look on literature. And maybe you can comment a little bit on this, and then what are the brightest examples probably in your publishing experience, what had been those? Maybe let's start with Lisa.
Examples of women being published?
No, you other way around. You told us about your male writer who was rejected by many publishers.
I love to tell that story. So yes, here it is: Solar Bones by Mike McCormack. Mike is an established Irish author, has won many awards, is a wonderful writer. It's a terrific novel, and I encourage everyone to read it. And he has been very outspoken about his experience of having been rejected, which is, I think it's very generous of an author to do that. I think a lot of times people keep that to themselves. So he has spoken about how it was always men that declined the book when they read it and said, this is pretty good, but I don't think it'll sell. I'm not sure the market will know what to do with it. It is one continuous sentence, which sounds off-putting. It's in fact extremely easy to read, and it's a very straightforward story. But his wife pushed him very much to write it. His agent, Marianne Gunn O'Connor, supported him and kept bringing it out on sub and kept just encouraging him, and has done this for years. And then when Tramp Press got to see the manuscript, Sarah and I jumped on it immediately. We thought it was clearly brilliant. And we didn't balk at the perceived difficulty of it. And a big part of our idea behind the company is that we hire talented people and we get out of the way. Similarly, we trust readers. If we'll publish something that's a bit difficult but very good, we trust that the readers will trust us, and that has very much borne out for us. It's a really good model. It just makes us look like we're like we're geniuses, but anybody who picks up this book can see it's clearly a wonderful novel. So Mike has spoken very generously and said women were the champions of this book. And it is in many ways a great feminist book too. The main character is a man, but there are many female characters in the book. And it's a very unusual depiction of an Irish man in a novel, in the sense that he is not toxic. He does speak to his family. He loves everyone. And, it's not something that we're always associated with on this island. So it sold lots and lots of copies and it won lots of awards. So that was well worth doing. And I think it's kind of nice as an echo that it should be a book that has a stream of consciousness at its core, and that it has been compared to Joyce a lot, as I think all Irish authors unfortunately have to be.
Any more nice stories, or should we go for the next question?
Oh, I just let my colleagues speak, I think.
Okay, now I would like to hear your comments on the issue raised 4 years ago by Sophie de Closet from Fayard. This is also one of the publishing houses from the Hachette group, but from France. And she was one of the first women in France becoming a CEO of a company, of a really literary house. And when France was guest of honor in Frankfurt Book Fair, she was giving a huge interview, which was perceived a little bit as a surprise, because she touched upon the problem, and that made the headline, "What troubles me is a lack of men in the publishing industry." And she spoke about the thing that there are so many acquiring editors, so many women working with literary texts, that she is a bit afraid that it makes these lists. We hear that, we already hear in this conversation that it might not ring the bell here in Ireland or in Latvia, but still there is this cautiousness about that probably that women know women, and there is this perception that women buy books, and therefore we have to produce more books for these buying women, and reading men is absolutely left out of the picture. Is it true or false, this statement, and what should we do about it? Please, ladies, who is first to answer?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I suppose a couple of things come to mind for me. It's not my experience that women are shy about reading men. I think most of the women I know who are big readers will read books by men and women. Maybe in some cases there are particular kinds of stories where they gravitate towards women authors, where they feel like, oh, that maybe this, I'm going to identify more with this depiction of motherhood, for example, because it's written by a female author. But not all female authors are mothers either. So, there's all of those kind of things. So to me, that doesn't present a huge problem. I actually find in some cases the opposite is true, where male authors can be more unwilling to read male readers can be more unwilling to read female authors. But I do think there is a point. I mean, to my mind, inclusivity is the thing. I don't think any company, should be, as Marielle said, should be filled with people who look the same, who sound the same, who come from the same kind of background. And that does include male and female voices. I mean, I do think, going back to a point I made earlier about there being, several publishing companies filled with women, and then right at the top, there's men. I think there should be, it should be common to see men in junior roles. It has been my experience in offices before where I've been, a woman in a junior role and there was a man in a junior role as well. I was always the one who made the coffee. I was always the one who was asked to, do those sort of menial tasks, remember people's birthdays and all those kinds of things. And I think, bringing in men in junior roles, but also treating them in a way that's fair. I think that is really important. I think it's important for publishing companies to be as inclusive as possible. And I don't really have an issue with, I don't think women specifically are going to run into issues in how they edit men or anything like that. But I think innovation is important. I think it's important that you look outside your own experience with your publishing. You're looking for fresh stories. You're trying to do something new. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I find even just to keep ourselves interested as publishers, you want to look for new things. If you're buying the same kind of book all the time to publish, you're going to start getting a bit bored and maybe not do as good a job. So I think that to me is more the thing. It's keeping your mind open to fresh ideas and not be going to the same wells all the time to find people. And as Lisa said, maybe actually be more proactive in discovering new voices.
Okay, ladies, Slido has woken up. And the question is, what is your opinion on the gender divide in marketing and design? For example, chick lit and romance novels with their typical cover designs versus more serious books supposedly for men. Who takes the question? Maybe who is the best experience in marketing? Joanna?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I can sort of answer that question from two perspectives, maybe. I think part of it is like, from a publisher's point of view, you're trying to, the market is really, really crowded. There's loads of books out there. There's loads of authors. So you want to very clearly place a book and an author to say, hi, you liked, say to a reader, hi, you really liked this very famous book that sold loads of copies. This book is like that. And the easiest way of me telling you that is showing you a cover that's quite similar. I personally read a huge amount of romantic fiction. So I don't know. I mean, the covers don't really bother me. I think what bothers me more is a cover like that being forced on a book where it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right to the author. Maybe it doesn't feel right to the editor. But because the book is by a woman, that cover is put on it, So I think, it's a complicated conversation for sure. And, I think as well that a book by, say, David Nichols or Nick Hornby about a romance or a family or becoming a parent will not be given a pink floral cover, whereas often a book by a woman about those same topics will be. So, there's a lot of different aspects to it. As a reader, it doesn't put me off because I know what I want, and that sort of cover shows me that that's what I'm going to get. But there definitely is many sides to it.
Thanks a lot. Any addition to that from anybody?
I would also
Inga?
like to comment, yes, because we as a publisher, when we do make those pinkish romance book covers, because sometimes we have experienced that not right book cover can kill the book. You make good book, but you don't put really because a cover in our market works. It finds its readers by cover. Only when author is famous and you know what he or she is writing, then you can put whatever and it will find its reader. But when you don't know author, cover is the first thing touching your eyesight. So we are not ashamed to put really these sweet covers for romance when it's about romance, when it's for female mental literature, because of course there is you need to know to whom you are selling the book, from my opinion. If you are just putting it out in the market and you don't even know how to go on with it, then it doesn't matter, it will be lost. But for those genres which is more read by both genders, of course we will never put something like stereotypically for just women or men. So it's my opinion.
Do you want to comment something, Una?
When we discuss covers, I always remember French covers. That for many publishers in France, they have only some color in the background, the name of the author and the title. I love those. So, yeah.
Yeah, but this is true, that the situation and also cover designs in the market, it depends so much also on the mentality and the perceptions in general, and because sometimes you see the covers made by the book you are publishing in other countries and you know what the hell it is, and it sells for them, but you would never sell a book with such a cover. That's true. We have another question. Which is going into the field of publishing. Did you feel it was more male or female dominated, and did this affect your actions and career choices? No, I think let's answer one by one. Marielle?
Gosh, so casting my mind back quite a few years. When I started in publishing, I think the house might have had, at the time, slightly more male employees, but like it's such a small house, there would have been only maybe 8 employees in total. So it couldn't have been like, it wouldn't have been hugely imbalanced. I think what was interesting when I started in publishing was like 2006, 2007. And, you know, I didn't have to do an internship because we were at the height of an economic boom. I think maybe 2 years later, everything kind of went off a cliff, and the entry modes into publishing changed a lot. So if I had to do an internship, I wouldn't be working in publishing because I don't come from a privileged background. There would have been no one to support me. I had to get a paying job after college. But I think maybe for the generation that followed me, there may be less diversity within that generation because there are so many people who just couldn't afford to work in our industry if they had to intern for free first.
Una?
I started working in the publishing house Zvaigzne when I saw the advertisement in the newspaper, Diena, and they were seeking for a proofreader. And it's not so easy to tell, but I even didn't know actually what are the tasks of the proofreader. I just knew that it's a publishing house Zvaigzne. It's related to the books. So, and therefore I started working there. And at that moment, I couldn't imagine that I will meet different authors, Latvian and even foreign, and that at one day I will have 2 editions, one original, for example, in any language, and the other one in Latvian. So it's like, you know, the dream come true. So that's my story.
Joanna, you?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that Marielle and I were a similar age, but I think I graduated from my publishing degree around that time when it was impossible to get a job. So I did end up doing an internship, and that was quite difficult. So, I mean, I do really agree with that point about inclusivity, that I took a job in Dublin and basically slept on people's couches and then went back to my parents' house at the weekend and worked, you know, to earn money. And, you know, and even then that was dependent on my parents' support, you know, them being willing to let me have my old room, etc. I think in terms of the question about gender, I think for me it was more about, you know, you might have guessed that I'm not the world's most literary reader. I do enjoy kind of loads of different types, but I suppose my true love would be really commercial fiction, kind of crime and romantic fiction. So I think for me, I had these kind of ideas about, oh gosh, if I'm not, you know, a Joycean scholar, there's no place for me in publishing. So actually finding my place, finding a publisher that published the kind of books that I read, a lot of books by women about about love and family and friendship and all that sort of thing, being published by a woman, where I could really, really see, okay, this is, an example of what I could do and who I could become. We've been talking about readers seeing themselves in stories and how important that is. I suppose I kind of saw myself in the editors at my company, and I suppose, not that I'm saying that it would have been a negative experience if it had been male editors, it just happened to be women, but it was just very specifically a clear message to me that kind of, I felt, showed me that there was a path for me as well, even though I wasn't the sort of typical, I felt, the kind of typical idea of a publisher.
Inga?
At the moment when I started to work in publishing house, I came from online news editing experience. So it was for me the biggest task, the biggest challenge was to get in a field which I really wanted to work in, but which I wasn't like meant at first sight, because I have a degree in cross-cultural relationships and had worked in news. Online news editing. So literature was something what I haven't done before, and it was the biggest challenge, not the gender issue. But after this another field, I felt that this is more women field where more of women work. But then getting to international book fairs, it occurred that in other countries it's more equally based with both genders. So kind of. I see that in Latvia we are more women, but in world it's different. It's various, both men and women. So for me it was never a question. I have been taken seriously everywhere.
Lisa, and you?
So I started out in magazines. That was one of my first publishing jobs. Luckily, that was paid. But when I wanted to get into literary publishing, it was a very painful process of having to do a badly paid internship and then do work in the evening time to pay for that, and stay at my horrible cousin's house, and it was a whole thing. And I think about now, if I were trying to get into the industry, I simply couldn't, because I am a mother now. And just makes me think of that conversation we were having the other day where Joanna made a very good point about childcare and how that can eliminate women from publishing, either as writers or indeed, like if you're trying to work in the industry, it takes a really long time to become stable and established. And that can have a huge effect on decisions around your personal life, which are, worth considering. But my experience of moving into literary publishing, so I was working in the music industry for a while, then in academia, and then I get into literary publishing, and I found them all to be quite male dominated and to have various ebbs and flows of power and stuff. But I found some really outrageous sexism in literary publishing that I might have expected to experience more from in the music industry, I think. And I found lots of having to do like manual, not manual, but the sort of insipid little tasks and things, like that you could be giving a manuscript a 12-page report, and you could be working very hard on a contract, but then you have to make tea for somebody who comes in and calls you good girl and stuff. So there was a lot of very maddening experiences. And I think something that we haven't really talked about yet is the Whisper Network, which is where women in junior roles or just people in publishing will share stories of negative experiences that they've had. And it's sort of alarming when you do get into the industry here, when people start trading stories and warning you and telling you who not to, be alone in a room with or whatever, that is a factor as well. I don't know if it's something that we want to get into, but something that we've experienced with the sessions that we do at festivals, where we'll meet with authors and we'll say, talk to us about publishing. What questions might you have about getting into the industry? Who's good to pitch your work to, and so on. Very often, young women will approach us and say, I had a strange experience. Is this normal? And it will be where an editor asked them out. They said no, and then their essay wasn't published in the journal after all, where it was implied that it would have been. That sort of thing. That is a hypothetical. That's not me defaming anyone, but that is also a force that pushes a lot of people out of the industry, and I think that's worth considering too. And I think that's why you can have an imbalance of of people. Sometimes you're coming from, as Marielle says, you might come from a much more privileged background. You might have a lot more confidence behind you. You might have a lot more support, and you might stand up to the bullies in the industry more easily. And other times it's just all too much because there's so many things coming together. And I think that's shaped our industry here in a big way.
Thanks a lot. And you touched about the issue of I cannot afford it. And actually, I think that one of the questions and one of the issues the industry as a whole will have to address in the nearest years. One is, of course, this how to keep audience reading at all, how to keep all society, not only some groups of female readers on board with books and publishing, but also how to attract enough money into risky projects, into supporting authors who deserve to be published, but on the other hand, of course, with diminishing readership, it's getting more and more difficult. And also Sophie de Closet, which I already mentioned, she explains one of the reasons why this disbalance of the genders in middle roles and junior roles are even increasing is that male expect bigger money, bigger bread to make, and as you already mentioned, Lisa, this industry is not something which brings a lot of earnings. On the other hand, I think we are one of the most important industries at all, because we cater language, we cater creativity, and we create critical thinking. And so I really wish us all good luck in persuading society that you have to keep reading and you have to pick up the book which speaks to you and start reading it all. But the question from the Slido is to each of you: which gender of books written by women is most sold from your company? Let's start with Marielle again.
So which genre of books written by women?
Yes.
I would say, well, it probably is most of I'd say our list as a whole, actually, certainly in the last couple of years, has been gender balanced. The books that are best-selling in the last couple of years have been written by women. They have been both literary fiction and non-fiction, quite interesting in history, where women are maybe underrepresented as authors, but there have been exceptions to that. And yeah, so and you can see it in general, like, women are dominating literary prizes at a time when, that kind of upends the conversation that was happening maybe 6-7 years ago, where men had been dominating the canon and the literary prize lists for centuries, and now all of a sudden, I think there was one year where one of the prizes, their shortlist was entirely female, but certainly it's on average in a balance of 3-to-1 females. And that then kind of translates into sales as well, I think, certainly in the literary sphere. Does that answer the question?
I'm sorry, what was the question? Which
literary gender written by women is the best selling for your company?
I suppose that these are novels and crime fiction. Though, these are the bestsellers. Nevertheless, who has written it, but of course also. These are best-selling on the list.
Joanna, who are you?
Like Marielle said, it's actually, I think with our non-fiction, it's kind of 50-50 men and women. Not every single year. 1 year there might be a few more books written by men, the next year a few more books written by women, but at the moment our fiction list is mostly women, not by design necessarily, but I mean, I think, yeah, so I mean, if you're going by numbers purely, it would be our fiction list, just because at the moment we publish a lot more fiction by women, and we do publish in that very commercial space. So, you know, when it comes to kind of more romantic fiction, or that kind of fiction about sort of domestic issues, you know, friendship, family, that sort of thing, tends to be more commonly written by women in our experience. So yeah, if you're looking at the numbers, it would be women dominating our fiction list at the moment, for sure.
Inga, you?
In a non-fiction list, I couldn't say, because that's mostly specialist and topic, which is most important thing. But in fiction list, it's a crime series written by Latvian autores on a bestseller list. And then during pandemic years, we understood that literary biographies are taking are rising, sales rising. So it's also written by women and goes well.
Lisa, for you?
Well, one of our most successful books is this from quite recently, Ghost in the Throat by Doirne Griafa. I'm going to just talk about this one because it defies genre. It's non-fiction. It's about a poet from the 18th century. The author becomes obsessed with her and writes about her. It's sort of a detective novel because she wants to find out where was she buried. We actually don't know what happened to her. She wrote a poem that was enormously it's one of the greatest poems in the Irish language. It was a huge big deal, and then drops off a cliff. And then the author also attempts to translate that poem because she is a poet herself. So you have Irish language stuff, you have historical fiction in where she tries to imagine in the gaps what could have happened. So it just is all of those things, but it sort of reads like a novel. And it has just done gangbusters for us. I'm sorry, I must come up with a better word than gangbusters. It's done extraordinarily well. Lots of awards, lots of sales, very positive feedback. And what we would take from that is it's a very untypical book, but it to our sort of experience, it just shows that readers want to hear unusual stories if they're told well, and that they are very open to new and interesting forms. And we could maybe start moving away from genre a little bit in how we market books, because something that's probably a conversation for another day is, I think it's very interesting. Joanna, you're such a big fan of romance, and we don't get to talk about romance the same way men get to talk about horror or crime. And it is a huge industry. My God, there's so much money in it. And it just doesn't have that same respect that it deserves, you know. So one of my, an author here, an Irish author, Dave Rudden, when he speaks about genre, he always says labels are for jam. And I think that can be a useful way to think about some things going forward. But the most sort of explosive and responsive reaction to books has always been for the unexpected. So that is something very positive that I think.
Yeah, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that Slido is woken up. Bad news is that the time is approaching. So I try to be very, very quick. The first question is for Irish, because we don't have this problem in Latvia. But how important is the gender of bookstore manager? Is it not possible for very diverse books to be published, but only very specific books to reach the buyer due to the power of the manager in hands? Who would like to comment? Just one of you, please.
Can I just say really quickly to that?
Yeah.
Women have played a huge role in this too. So it will depend on the individual bookseller, but conservatism can drive those decisions, and that can be based in sexism. That's not necessarily arising from the gender of the bookseller, but we're very lucky with our booksellers here. I think they're quite open and receptive. So anyway, I'll let somebody else speak.
From the looks of the other Irish ladies, I see that it's true. Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, the buyer for Argosy and Eason's so they're our biggest wholesalers, and Easton's is the biggest chain in Ireland. They are both women. The most of the buying for the Bray chain is also done by women. On an individual shop-by-shop level, there will be some male buyers, but it's probably, forgive me if I'm wrong now, but I think it's probably predominantly women doing the buying. Would you agree, Joanna?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same situation here in Latvia. And I think it's our last question for today. There are many discussions about gender gap in film industry awards for female directors. Do you feel that there is same problem with literary awards in Ireland and in Latvia for female authors? For Latvia, I would definitely say no. Now let's go to Ireland.
I mean, this is something I think we touched upon briefly. I think what we found is that maybe 10 years ago, it was a much bigger thing, but of late, there have been more women getting deserved attention when it comes to prizes. I wouldn't say it's a kind of a safe bet that it's going to be, you know, that each shortlist or anything is going to be gender balanced, but I do think it's moving in the right direction. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, I'd agree. I did a bit of research on this last night, and probably most shortlists for the kind of the main UK literary prizes were either 50-50 or they were weighted towards women. Now, I mean, there's a discussion about whether that's a good thing, that maybe they're a bit too weighted towards women now, that like if it's gone too much in the other direction, are men being written out of the narrative? And where does that leave young men who maybe, you know, haven't had their experiences represented in the canon? Not to feel too sorry for them, but you know, it is a consideration that we don't go too much in one direction or another. I think balance is important across all areas.
And just to bang this drum again, I mean, I think prizes tend to be focused on one genre or two genres, you know, that, I mean, there are some really cool, say, crime fiction prizes in the UK, the Dagger Prize and things like that. But I think in the main, prizes, especially the prizes with the most money, tend to be for literary fiction only. And, you know, the landscape of books is more than literary fiction, even though literary fiction is really, really important. So I would like to see that maybe as something, and as Lisa said, you know, something like romantic fiction is actually a huge industry with, you know, millions of readers around the world. And yet, I don't know if, you know, there's a romantic fiction novelists award that's run in the UK, and I don't think that gets written about in the paper, you know, in the same way that other awards do. So, I mean, I do feel like there's a bit of work there, that there is kind of a gender aspect to that, which I would like to see change.
Well, thanks, immense thanks for everybody for spending your afternoon sharing experiences of being women publishers in Ireland and in Latvia. I do hope that we gave some insight into this topic. Be sure that not all things we even didn't mention, because there are a lot of things, but I think that the most important conclusion would be of this conversation that it's not so much gender which is important. We need to have interested people who love their job. We have to have interesting authors and interested audience. And this is something we really have to invest our efforts and our life into, and really wish you that we are better remunerated, but good luck with your experiences, and thanks a lot for being with me today in Latvia National Library and on screen. And now I have to say thanks to audience, thanks to all the speakers, and give back the microphone to the ambassador for the final farewell words. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renata, and to all our panelists. That was such a fascinating discussion. I think my takeaway was certainly that we all need to think about diversity and inclusivity. And that question, women in publishing, does it really matter? Well, once we have all of that in mind, then that's where we can go into the future. I really think we could have gone on for hours there, but before we go our separate ways, I just would like to say a huge word of thanks to everyone who was involved in making this happen here today. It didn't just happen by magic. I'd like to say thank you so much to the team at the National Library for welcoming us in here, particularly to Victoria and Yanis, Christians, and all the AV team that I can see in front of me here, and to the director, Mr. Anders Wilks, for your support for this project. Also, thank you to our interpreters for their adeptness at interpreting the Irish accents, which aren't always the most straightforward. To Sinead and Lindsay at Literature Ireland, without whom we really would not have been able to find all of these incredible voices you've been hearing today. To the team at Roberts Books, and particularly Oscar's, who put his creative mind to our designs. And to the team in the Department of Foreign Affairs Irish Abroad Unit in Dublin for their support. And finally, also my team at the Embassy, particularly Anita Bouthray, who did a lot of hard work to make this happen. But I really cannot say enough how much I appreciate the time, the thoughts and the talent of our wonderful panellists and our skilled moderator. Thank you so very much to all of you. And most of all, thanks to everyone who joined online today to listen and to share. If you are interested in connecting more with Irish literature as a publisher or a translator, retailer, librarian, lover of books, you can contact us through the Embassy's website, which is dfa.ie/Latvia. And just this event, I suppose, it's going to be several of one that we hope to have during the centenary year of Ulysses, where we will continue to reflect on this subject of women in literature. So we will be sharing details, I hope, of more things to come through social media and other channels. So please do keep an eye out. Our next event, we hope, will be a pop-up book club, reading Nora by Nuala O'Connor, which just so happens by coincidence, rather than designed to be published by Marielle's company, New Island Books. But dear friends, St. Bridget's Day, as the director said at the start, is considered to be the start of spring in Ireland. It's a time of hope and a time of new growth. I know today in Latvia we're still looking out at ice and snow, but I think our conversation today does give us great optimism for the future of literature and for the growth of new creativity. So thank you so much for joining. Piedalīsies.